guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name's Katie. I'm a freelance editor and an indie author, and today we're gonna do an editor talk video. We haven't done one of these in a little while, so if you're new here or if you've missed the previous ones, I'll have the playlist linked. I think this will be our 4th editor talk video. Also, just a sidebar, if you enjoy videos about publishing, editing, writing, and stuff like that, I put 2 bonus videos all about that kind of stuff on my Patreon page, and I'll have that link down below. But I wanted to bring some more publishing content back over onto this channel for today, so I thought it would be interesting to talk about things that editors wish that their writers knew. So obviously I'm going to be drawing from my own experience, but actually I have several other editors who follow me on Instagram, so I put up a question box on my stories and was like, hey, what are some things that you wish that your clients knew? And we had a lot of things in common, and they also came up with some things that I hadn't really thought about. So I think it'll be an interesting discussion. I do feel like I have to get like a disclaimer out of the way though. If you're watching this, if you're a present, past, future client of mine, if you hear me like talk about something that I've commented on your manuscript, I just like don't want this to feel like a call out or anything like that, because the reason why I'm bringing up these points is because they're so common and I see them so often, so none of these are specific to any one person. And also, obviously I can only speak from my experience and the other editors that I know, but no editor is ever judging you on your writing or the quality of your manuscript or your abilities or anything like that. Like, especially editors who are writers themselves, like we all have been in every like stage of writing or level of writing that you're at. Like, we've been there. Editors shouldn't be scary. Like, we're honestly your biggest cheerleaders, and everyone has to learn these things at some point. So anyway, I thought this would be kind of interesting, hopefully helpful, maybe a fun video to do. But before we get into all my talking points, I just want to say a quick thank you to today's sponsor, Campfire. I've worked with Campfire a couple of times in the past. I actually have a whole video where I show myself outlining one of my books using their software, so I'll have that link down below if you missed that. But basically, Campfire is a program for writers to help them stay organized. I found it super helpful. It's one of my new favorite writing programs. They have so many different features to help you stay organized. Some people use it to outline their book. Some people use it to make like a series Bible. They have character pages, timelines, corkboard style maps, character arcs. Campfire Pro is a one-time purchase for $49.99. But if you're writing something like fantasy and you think you could benefit from creating magic systems, species, languages, and things like that with their world building pack, that's an additional add-on for $24.99. They offer a 10-day free trial and a 10-day money-back guarantee. So there's really no risk in trying them out and see if you like them. Especially if you're like me and you have like a million different documents for your story. Things can get so disorganized so quickly, so it's really nice to have everything in one place. So I'll have the link down below in my description if you guys want to go check it out. NaNoWriMo's coming up in November. I'm already planning. I know a lot of other people are too. So make sure to check that link down below in my description if you want to try them out 10 days for free. Without further ado, let's get straight into the video. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the thing that like popped into my head that inspired this whole video in the first place, and then when I asked on my Instagram stories, almost everybody also said this one. I think the number one thing that editors wish clients knew before getting an editor is how to properly format their manuscripts. Obviously every editor is different and they're gonna have different preferences and everything, but there is standard manuscript formatting in the industry, and it's not like a nitpicky thing. It makes it easier for the editor to read your text, and they're gonna be better at their job the more readable your story is. And you're gonna have to have it in proper formatting eventually, so you might as well do it before you send it to your editor. And it's super easy to do. It's not super complicated. You want 12-point font. Don't use any like crazy fancy fonts. You can use whatever font you want if you're self-publishing down the road, but if you're sending it to your editor, Times New Roman is pretty standard. You want it to be double spaced. Don't put extra spaces between the paragraphs. Indent using the ruler tool, not the tab, and indent all of your paragraphs. Keep your margins normal, all of that kind of stuff. If you just Google standard manuscript formatting, it will tell you everything that you need to know. Kind of in a similar vein, a lot of people said, I wish that my clients knew how to do proper punctuation, especially when it comes to dialogue. This is definitely something that I run into all of the time. I would say fixing punctuation with dialogue is probably the thing that I do most frequently. Also, this is not hard information to find. A little bit of research and you will find it, no problem. And it's also, again, not super hard to do. I feel like once you get the hang of it, it just becomes second nature and you don't even have to think about it anymore. I could make like an entire video about this, and there's already a ton of videos here on YouTube about this, so I'm not going to get super into it, but every time you have a new speaker, they should be on their own line. You don't just want a block of text with a ton of different speakers in the same paragraph. That gets super confusing. If you're using a dialogue tag, which is a whole other conversation, more often than not, just use said. You don't have to get super fancy. So basically, maybe I'll put like an example up on the screen. You put the dialogue in quotation marks, comma, not a period, said whoever said that. The only exception here is if you use like an exclamation point or a question mark, then you don't need a comma. And then the dialogue tag should not be capitalized. I'm trying to think about any other common mistakes I see with dialogue. The punctuation should be inside of the quotation mark. This is something I've been seeing a lot recently, actually. If you have like a long block of text, you only need one dialogue tag if it's the same character. I've had some instances where it's been like, yes, Freddie, I'm hungry, said Bob, blah, 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 said Bob, twice for the same block of dialogue. You only need the one. The only purpose of a dialogue tag is to clarify for the reader who's speaking, especially if it's a simple one like said character. There's exceptions to this, obviously. Sometimes people have action tags, more description with their dialogue tags and stuff. Again, we're not going to get super into that here though. Basically, a fundamental building block to a lot of these points will be just to do a little bit of research and be constantly working to improve your craft. Because basically, if the writing has so many fundamental issues with it, like it's not properly formatted, it's not super easy to read because there's a million different speakers all in one paragraph, there's only so much that your editor can do because they're going to be offering you, like, I don't know how better to describe this, they're going to be offering you like level 1 suggestions and how to just get your text readable in the first place. Whereas if you've already done that yourself, you've done your research, you've learned how to properly do your dialogue, you've learned how to format, and the work is already relatively readable, they're going to be able to give you better insights. They're going to be able to help the writing be better. They're going to get to like level 2, level 3. I just made that up. That's not like an actual thing, but you know what I mean? Basically, the more work that you put in ahead of time, the better the editor is going to be able to do their job. Another one people said really commonly was use said most of the time in your dialogue tags. Doesn't mean you have to use said all of the time, but said is virtually invisible to the reader on the page, so it doesn't really stick out. But if you have a different dialogue tag, every single line of dialogue, it's just so like flashy to the reader and it really pulls you out of the story and it's very unnecessary. And I can't even blame writers for this one because I know for a fact that my English teachers in high school and everything like told everyone don't use said, like use better vocab. They started this trend and they're so wrong. There's nothing wrong with the word said. If you need to use a different dialogue tag every once in a while, it makes it more effective if the rest of them are just said. But if you have a fancy one for every line of dialogue, it just gets kind of like convoluted. So if it's like said, demanded, said, asked, like that works better than said, asked, demanded, concluded, answered, responded. Like you don't need all of that variety. This is a big one. Resist the urge to over-explain. Also, not everything needs to be on the page. So by this I mean, I read a lot of writing that is super repetitive because I feel like writers have the right instinct and they know what they're doing, but then they worry that they didn't do it right or that the reader's not going to understand what they were trying to convey. So then they go the extra mile and over-explain what they just showed you, which is a whole like show, don't tell debate. If you're showing us that your characters are frustrated on the page, for example, and we see that through the way that they're talking to each other and we see that through their body language, you don't need to go on and explain on top of that it was clear they were frustrated with each other or something like that, you know? Trust your reader enough to read between the lines and to pick up on what you're putting down, you know? I hate myself for just saying that. And then not everything needs to be on the page. You don't need to explain like every step of something. Like you don't need to show they walked up the stairs and then they looked at their friend and then they waited and then while that was happening someone else walked up the stairs and then they looked at them and then they all continued down the hallway and they went through this doorway and then they got in the room and then he looked at him again. Like it just really slows the pace of your writing when you do that, and none of these actions are super interesting to read or particularly significant to the scene. So it's better to just jump over all of those mundane details and descriptions and be like, they went upstairs. All of the things in between, you might be able to picture this very clearly in your head that the person looked at that person, then looked at that person was walking slower, but they might not be important details for the reader to know at this moment. This is something that someone else suggested and I totally agree with this. Research track changes ahead of time. If you're unfamiliar with the program Microsoft Word, there's a function in it called track changes, and this is the way that the majority of editors, at least every single one that I know, uses track changes in order to leave their comments and track the changes that they make in your manuscript. It's exactly what it sounds like. You turn on the little button and so then if I make a comma, it'll show up in a different color so you can see that I made the change. If I delete something, it'll say on the side this was deleted. If I add something, it'll show up in a different color. And then I can like leave comments on the side so you can see every single change that I've made to your manuscript. Every single comment that I've left you is in the margins. You can accept changes, reject changes, reply to my comments, things like that. So again, yeah, this is just a really standard thing that I think most editors use. So it would just be nice to familiarize yourself with it or at least look into it a little bit ahead of time so you know what to expect. I think it's super easy to use. I think it's super user-friendly and intuitive, so I wouldn't be intimidated by that if you've never used it before, but I think it would be helpful for you to do a quick little Google search ahead of time. So the next thing on our list we've kind of already touched on, do the work on your own first. We kind of briefly touched on this. Editors can do a better job if you've already put in the work yourself. If you send an editor a rough draft or a draft that you've only like read over 1 or 2 times, you haven't let it sit and taken the time to try to revise it on your own, you haven't gotten alpha readers or beta readers, you haven't really tried to edit it at all, your editor can only do so much. At that point, again, they're going to be making basic changes. If you already did all of the basic stuff ahead of time, your editor's really going to be able to dive in and be able to like really make your writing shine and make it the best that it can be. If they're so focused on just making it readable, there's only so much that they can do. There's a very common thread through a lot of these. Do your research first. And by this, I mean, do you know what genre your book is? Do you know what the target audience is? Do you know what kind of editing you're looking for? What are your goals for the project? Are you gonna traditionally publish, self-publish? These are all really important things to know, especially the genre and the target audience. Like, there are different expectations for different genres and different categories. Like, the way that I would edit a middle grade novel is very different than the way that I would edit an adult novel. So knowing the difference between them, knowing the expectations for your genre, especially if you're self-publishing, this is super important. Knowing where your book fits with other books, like what bookshelf is it going to be on in a bookstore. Do a little bit of research on the different kinds of editing and what kind of editing that you need. Now, you can always reach out to an editor. I do this very frequently with my clients where people will say, I think this is what I want, I'm not really sure. We do a sample and we have a discussion on the needs of the project, the goals of the project, and we come up with something together. That's totally fine, but I still think you should do a little bit of research first. Like, do you know the difference between developmental editing and line editing and proofreading? My last major note, again, every editor works differently. This is just a personal preference for me and for a lot of other editors that I know. Do everything that you can before you send it to your editor, but then once your editor has your manuscript, stop. Please. This has happened to me so many times where I've had clients where we've had, say, like a month turnaround time or something, and they'll email me like a week or 2 before the deadline and be like, hey, I made some major changes to the manuscript. Can I send you the new version? And I'm sitting here like, I'm already 75% done. Like, no, I already did all of that work. And I don't know any editor who would go back and do it again, honestly. Some editors even have it up front in the contract that you're not gonna make changes while they have the document. So just make sure that you're really sure that the manuscript is where you want it to be before you send it to your editor, and don't make changes while they have it. Because if I've already put in like 10 hours of work into your manuscript and then you try to send me a new version to start over, like, especially if it's close to the deadline, I think it's okay if you reach out and be like, hey, have you started yet? And if they haven't started yet, then maybe send them a new document. But I think just the baseline rule should be, make sure you're happy with your manuscript. You've done everything that you can before you send it off. So now I'm just gonna look through the responses that I got on Instagram to see if anybody said anything else. Wish clients knew how to format dialogue, basic punctuation rules. It's okay to say said, you don't have to find creative ways every time. Small things like basic formatting makes it so much easier to read, and then I can concentrate on editing finer details. Oh, I like this one. This one's more positive. It's okay to have your own voice. You don't have to follow stereotypes of traditional writing. I wish clients would research track changes before we work together. And then cutting back clutter or overwriting. So those were the most common answers. And to recap on my list, proper formatting, proper punctuation, especially for dialogue, using said most often for dialogue. Resist the urge to over-explain, and not everything needs to be on the page. Research track changes. Do everything that you can on your own before hiring an editor so it's in the best possible shape that it can be in before it hits that editor's desk. And don't make changes while the editor is working on it. And do your research first. Know your target audience, know your genre, know your goals, know the different kinds of editing, at least vaguely. I think that's it. If any of you watching also happen to be editors, I would love to hear your opinions on the matter down below in the comments. So yeah, leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you guys. Feel free to leave any questions that you have still down below. If you're looking for an editor, I'll have my website linked down below. I am pretty much completely booked until November, but if you happen to be looking for someone towards the end of the year, I would love to work with you. I'll have the playlist linked down below for the other editor talk videos if you missed those. And maybe subscribe and stick around if you're new here. I'd love to have you, and I'll just see you guys in another video very, very soon. Bye.
So hit me. So hit me. So hit me. First a confession. With you, I feel a connection. With